advanced copy, a Word version, Word MS Word version of your book. So I actually clipped it and used it to write my own book. I hope you don't mind.
It probably had track changes all over it in red ink.
So let's talk about who we are.
Yep.
Why don't you go first since you're our guest?
So David Weill, my primary career has been that of a transplant doctor. I spent most of my time up north at Stanford, running the lung and heart-lung transplant program there. I left Stanford several years ago, moved back to my hometown of New Orleans. So those of you who can't understand my accent, there'll be simultaneous translation is provided for you. This is my third book. My first couple books were in the transplant world, both memoir and fiction. But this is the book that I've been waiting to write since I was a little boy, which if you read the book, you will find out why. I've struggled my entire life with religious identity. So here we are with Tell Me I Belong. That's my story. I live full time in New Orleans, and I got a chance to meet Ron, and he'll tell you all about himself.
Yeah. So you bring out the rabbi to interview the Jew, I guess, right? Rex talks about belonging, finding Judaism. But I've spent my career as a Reform rabbi. I grew up as a Reform Jew, and I tell you that because it's significant. Of the Jewish denominations, I think Reform Judaism is one of the ones that's most on the sort of border of Judaism. And what I mean by that is we have a lot of crossing over. We have both intermarried families in our congregation. We have people who've chosen Judaism, and we obviously welcome that. So we see a lot of folks who have walked different paths than just like my path, which was born to two Jewish parents, grew up going to synagogue. So I became a rabbi, right? It wasn't really a question. So that experience of finding a place to belong is something that we experience regularly as Reform rabbis. So that's where I actually want to start my question. My questions of you, which is the title of the book, Tell Me I Belong, assumes something. And that is that we know what you mean when you use the word belong. So what I'd love to hear from you as a man who really grew up without a strong awareness of his identity other than the most peripheral way, then became a Catholic, and then stepped out of that community into the Jewish, well, I don't even know if you could use that Jewish community for you, but so what does belonging mean? And then how would you, if you were going to preach that message to others, what might you encourage them to do in terms of a path to belonging? And I'm going to just add one more piece to it, which is that one of the burning issues of our world now is this sense of alienation where people feel like they don't belong. Mm-hmm. So how do you define belonging for yourself and in this world today?
Yeah, so to me, belonging feels like home, right? And so I think that someone like me growing up interested in team sports, did transplant as a career, 60-person team. I very much wanted to be part of a team. And I write in the author's note that we're a tribal society, and humans have always been, in my view.
We being everybody.
We meaning everybody. We're tribal in a way that we want to be able to answer the question easily, what team do we belong to? When somebody says, what religion are you? We want an answer to that. I desperately wanted one when I was young. Didn't have it. So, son of a Holocaust survivor, mother who was Southern Baptist from Selma, Alabama, involved in the civil rights movement, both turned their back on their religion, and they decided to raise us without it. And that's okay, except if you're going through your life wanting to be on a team and you can't answer the question, what religion are you? And so to me, and the reason, this is actually the first of my books that I've actually titled. I'm really bad at thinking of titles, but Tell Me I Belong is something that I had in the back of my mind the whole time. I wanted to actually be part of one of these teams. And in New Orleans, where I grew up, there was really three groups. There was a multi-generational Jewish community there, which is probably not well known, small but distinct. And there was a large Catholic population. And then there was a Black population that was mostly Baptist. And you were one of the three. And except for me, not one of the three. And that never sat well with me.
So belonging means being able to declare to oneself that I've elected to be part of this community, right? So, because we use the term belong, you belong to a synagogue, you belong to a church, right? Or you go to a church. You talk belonging on a team, you're wearing a uniform, right? I'm looking at you. Funny, you don't look Jewish, right? So, like, what defines for you your Jewish belonging?
Well, I don't
speak Hebrew.
No.
Do you read Hebrew?
No.
Do you keep kosher?
No.
Okay, so like I'm hitting the 3, right? You go to synagogue every week?
No.
Okay, so what is it then?
Well, it was.
And I'm not trying to guilt you here.
No. I appreciate it, because I think until I did this work and I decided to do this work, and you spend 3 years with it, you reach certain conclusions. And one that's undeniable is that my heritage, I am Jewish. I mean, there's no, whatever my opinion is of that is almost irrelevant, because I am Jewish. So my mother, Southern Baptist, converted to Judaism before she married my father. She neglected to tell me that until 2 years ago.
Right.
And that's part of the book. I don't want to spoil all of it, but it was kind of a revelation, I would say. Right. And so my Judaism comes in the heritage, 650 years of rabbis going back to 1300 in Germany. And after completing this work, it's kind of hard to turn your back on that and say, well, I think I'm X religion. Well, I'm not. I'm Jewish.
And I think you felt it most powerfully because your path to Judaism was relatively recent.
Yeah.
After October 7th.
Yeah.
And you faced off against protesters. And here we find ourselves again facing another round of Jewish trauma. And how did you feel when you were standing there now fully embracing your Jewish identity and facing off against people who were challenging things you held dear, connection to Israel, all those kinds of things?
Well, there was something, I think, innate in me, and I actually today an article came out in the Forward. Does anybody do you all read that or know what that periodical is? So I published something today in the Forward called "Running into the Burning Building," and it's about the fact that even though I'm relatively late to embracing Judaism, the notion of running into Judaism when it's not exactly the most popular thing in the world right now feels good to me. I actually like that, because I think I'm attracted to saying, look, this is my team, and if my team's in trouble, I'm going to try to help if I can. I don't want to overstate my significance in the world. So I don't have any problem with that. And I also innately knew that my ancestors, many of whom perished in the Holocaust, my father's family persecuted in the Holocaust, my grandfather in a camp and got out. It wasn't lost on me that this wasn't the first time that our family experienced persecution. And so when October 7th rolls around, I'm sitting in my kitchen watching the images on the screen, and I'm in the middle of doing the work for this book, and I felt something. And I felt like they're not attacking those people, they're attacking us. And my wife, who's Catholic, was watching the same images and turns to me and said, why does everyone hate the Jews? And it was the first time that I realized that something like that might be lost on people that don't have that heritage, that don't understand what's gone on since biblical times.
Sure, one can understand why someone might say, I'm going to leave it all behind. Your father.
Yeah.
I don't want to be a part of that.
Yeah. I mean, I remember just on my father, his name is Hans Weill, okay? Not exactly an American sounding name, right? I asked him when I was a little boy, why didn't you name me Hans? Because a lot of my friends, especially in New Orleans, were named after the father. Why didn't you name me Hans? And he said, I wouldn't do that to you. And I didn't know what he meant. I was a little boy, but I know what he meant now.
I'm going to change up a little bit. Move from a tough topic, Judaism, to a really easy one, God. Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah. So as a transplant surgeon, you've had this incredible experience of literally holding a beating heart in your hands, putting your hands in someone's chest and either taking their heart out or putting one in or lungs or whatever you were connecting. You gave life to somebody. That's very godlike. To be able to stand over someone and look
That's
at
what
someone.
I told everybody around me.
Well, that's what, and you've heard about the God complex and how,
Yeah.
and what it would be understandable for you to feel that. So, two questions. First of all, are the pitfalls of feeling like God? And then, and you talked about it a little bit in the book, maybe go a little deeper, that what did you take away in terms of sort of your spiritual awareness? At some point in the book, you talk about how a lot of doctors and most doctors believe in God. And then the contradiction of that is, though, but you're in the role of, what's the difference between you and the God you believe in? But those are, let's start with the first question, which is, what are the pitfalls that one can fall into of knowing that you control life the way you do as a doctor?
Well, there are a lot of pitfalls to that. And sometimes they leak into the world outside the hospital, because in the hospital it's fine. Doctors act like they act, right? And doctors are known for a ton of humility, I think, and that actually is sort of okay in the hospital, especially earlier in my career. It's gotten a little less fashionable as time went on, but it's not so good outside the hospital. But the thing that actually was the most informative about what happened inside the hospital, even when I was undifferentiated in terms of my own religious identity, is the mysticism, the mystical nature of the kind of work I did. I mean, you're changing the direction of somebody's life with an operation. And so even though I didn't have formal religion for most of my career, there was a religion about what we did. And this would go for our whole team. There was a spirituality in that we were practicing a form of what we thought was worship, because we thought we were doing something, really important. But I think you're right. To your question, I think you have to, if you're going to be sort of have relationships outside the hospital, I think you have to guard against, thinking so highly of yourself.
You have to leave.
Yeah, you do.
Complex in the hospital.
You try to. I mean, I think, my younger self thought that when patients did well after a transplant, it was because of me. When they did poorly after a transplant, it was also because of me, which isn't so good. But then as I grew up and matured, I realized that neither of those is true.
I think what you're touching on is this profound sense of awe that when few of us see that up close, but given the opportunity to see someone on the edge of life like that up close, one experiences this profound sense of just awe over the power of life. There was actually just a piece in, I think it was either Times or maybe I think it was the Atlantic, where a physicist was writing about how that physicists thought that if they cracked the atom, they cracked the secret to life. And what they've discovered is that life is so complex and that the atoms are so interrelated, and that whereas this table is always going to be a table in this shape and form until you burn it up, and then you know exactly what happens to it, the arrangement of the atoms inside a human body change as a person ages. And that this physicist wrote that he encountered awe through that experience. And I think you're kind of capturing that deep realization.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, I spent most of my career, not going to any house of worship except going to the hospital, and that was plenty, at that time. But I think it's something that's always been there for me.
So you wrote in your book about being a college student in 1985 that one cannot be confident about the fate of the human species after examining human behavior during the Holocaust. Now, you were still, what religion were you back then? Nothing. Yeah, it was. So, and then you went on. So you quoted yourself, and then you went on in the book. It was perhaps a banal statement if written by an older author, but I must confess that I was startled reading it now, providing an insight into a dark corner of my 21-year-old mind that I didn't remember existed. Was it pessimism about human nature, what we are a species capable of, and how it influenced my outlook on life? So then you went on to say, did I choose to be a doctor because I wanted to change the fate of another human being, especially by one who I wanted to prove that I could do better? And that notion certainly bears consideration. So you basically said that on some level, I think that you were undoing the Holocaust by healing people. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I mean, I think so. And even though I couldn't articulate it, back then, I had some kind of understanding that what had happened was significant. It might have happened to my family. But I also think that as I did the research for the book, I got very interested in the emotional inheritance, and you may get to that later, about what Holocaust survivors' offspring, what happens to them, what is passed on from generation to generation. And one of the most profound things that I found out is me, want to fix everyone and receive their gratitude and be almost like you're constantly wanting people to look at you and say, you did good. No, you're really good. You did really good, And I think part of the career that I had, it was a perfect vehicle. If you want that kind of feedback and you want that gratitude, I could get it any day I wanted it.
Yeah, it was a tough one. You had losses too. You had plenty of times that it didn't work.
That's right.
And then, so you put yourself, I think, if you want to help humanity, you probably in so many ways, you put yourself in a position where you can have the most impact, and also in a position where your failures are, I give a bad sermon, okay, right? You do bad surgery and the patient dies. So you really put yourself in a position where wins and losses are profound. Deep consequences.
Yeah, and
Obviously.
Yeah, and that's what my first book was about, called Exhale. It was about the emotional roller coaster of it, but it's an innate desire to live on that edge. And even if me or someone on my team didn't do anything wrong, quote unquote, we're treating people that are going to die, and so sometimes they do. And it was the inability, the younger version of me, I had no ability to accept that as true, because I thought if I did everything right and my team did everything right, they should all live. That's pretty arrogant. I mean, I recognize that now.
When it didn't go right, you had to go tell them you were one, right?
Yeah.
Did you have a set speech? Or what did you do?
I didn't really have a set speech so much as I wanted to assure the family that we did the best we could and that they did the best they could. Because a lot of times, and I noticed this throughout my career, patients that did not do well with a transplant, the family members question nearly everything about their own actions. Did we go see the doctor soon enough? Did we get on the list soon enough? Did we support the person through it soon enough? It's almost like I was there to say, you did well and we did well. It didn't work. And what's interesting about American healthcare is patients have, I think, limited ability to realize that there are limits to what we can do. I think we've gotten to the point where we're used to these miracles, right? And we've gotten to the point where we think if anybody dies, somebody did something wrong. I mean, we should all live forever. But that's obviously not true.
Right. And the hardest thing to accept.
Very hard.
Coach Fitz.
Yeah.
So there's a character is a real life person in
the
story. If you read about Coach Fitz, he was hugely influential. In fact, I would say he was your priest. right?
Yeah.
When you were, or your rabbi, whichever you would have
Yeah.
gone to. Because he was the guy who you found comfort in his home. You looked up to him. He brought your team together.
Mm-hmm.
You thought he taught you morality on the field as much as he taught you how to play football.
Yep.
Since this is a book about finding religion, I think it begs the question: why wasn't Coach Fitz enough? There's a secular religion that we have, and we have it in this country in all kinds of ways. Right?
Yeah.
And what for you compelled you to say that's not enough? Secularity doesn't fulfill me.
Because it was interesting about people like Coach Fitz, Billy Fitzgerald, so Irish Catholic, right? Important to me, a daily mass goer, a coach to many of us for many years, including the writer Michael Lewis, who wrote a book called Coach, about Coach. And what I got the distinct impression is that he had a lot of valuable lessons to teach me, but he also had a religion that was his own, and it wasn't mine. And even though I could get a lot from this man, the one thing I could not get is his devout Catholicism. And that also didn't sit well with me, because I was like, look, I can have these male mentors and they can give me things, but I want my own. And there was always this separation between what was his Catholicism and what was mine, not Catholicism.
Do you think it influenced the decision you made when you were married to Jackie and you decided to become Catholic? You think you had the memories of Coach Fitz?
Yeah, definitely. I think that, what happened there, and I'm not the first person that's ever met professional or personal crisis in terms to religion, but the only problem is I didn't have one. And I basically got tired of my two daughters and my wife running off to church on Sunday, and I'm running off to the hospital. And there's a separation that happens. And my daughter's getting old enough to say, why don't you come to church with us? What religion are you anyway? And I would say my religion's over there in the hospital, or I would make some other, comment. But that didn't really work. And as I went through the process of exploring Catholicism, I was blown away by it. I mean, I say that in the book. It's not, how I come out in the book and how I conclude it is not a rejection of Catholicism. It's just not mine.
It was the wrong suit of clothes.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of flirted with it, rented it maybe, but it wasn't mine. It was theirs.
All right, let's dive into that inherited trauma. So there's a book called The Long Island Compromise. Have you read it? I recommend it.
No.
Taffy Brodesser-Akner. It's about she dives deeply into I call it transgenerational trauma or inherited trauma. And each of her characters is somehow profoundly influenced by an event that happens in their patriarch's life. They're a Jewish family, but that's peripheral to the event that affects everybody, and they all act out from that trauma in different ways. For you, there's the notion that your father, your grandfather's experience of the Holocaust. By the way, we discovered that we have similar stories. My father left at about the same age that his father did. My grandparents left Germany. My grandfather was briefly in a camp, not a death camp, but a concentration camp. Yours, I think, was
Buchenwald.
He was in a death camp. Yeah. So both got out. Both made it to the States. Your grandparents, for some reason, your father didn't pick up Judaism from your grandparents, or he basically said, "I'm done."
Right.
And that decision and the experiences that they had, you felt like left its mark on you in a profound way. Would you call it a scar? What would you call it? Would you call it baggage? What word would you use?
I think, just as you inherit from your parents' eye color, hair color, mannerisms, you inherit their emotional stuff too. There's another word that starts with S that I won't. And I think what's interesting is I started reading about emotional inheritance generally, and then I started reading about Holocaust survivors' offspring specifically. And I found myself going, okay, well, that's why I do that, or this is why I am how I am. And a lot of it has to do with this unsettled feeling that if you don't be all that, if you don't achieve and you don't strive and you don't assimilate, and then things aren't going to go well. And I think that a lot of how I built my career, for instance, had something to do with seeking all of that, and sometimes seeking it rather robustly. And I think it's an interesting area of study, whether or not you have a Holocaust survivor in your family or not. I didn't understand one of my father's favorite sayings. It was, I think he got it from Benjamin Disraeli, and he actually had a plaque on his desk that said "Never complain and never explain." And so, if my family had a motto, the little thing you put above your jacket, it would be "Never complain, never explain." No, I don't know how he would feel about my writing this book, because it's a lot of explaining. But he very much was head down. You don't have to explain a lot, and certainly don't complain about your circumstance. And that's how he raised us.
So it's basically repress it. Right?
Definitely.
Repression.
He was big on that. Yeah. Repression was important to him.
So sorry for my post-cold scratchy throat. So the stain or the baggage was an inability to express oneself. Yep. An inability to kind of, Elie Wiesel went the opposite way, right? He wrote books and books and books about his Holocaust experiences, whereas you're I'm not talking about it.
Right.
My grandparents wrote about it once, and that was the end of the conversation. They didn't talk about Germany. They didn't talk about their experience of getting out there. My uncle got them to write about it, and then they were done. So they had that similar kind of repression, even though their German accents gave them away all the time.
Right.
So other than it being your legacy identity, how do you think that Holocaust memory, epigenetic, you want to call it, how do you think that moved you to Judaism? Did you feel a responsibility and obligation to carry it forward?
I think it really literally struck me at the end of the research for this book. I go to Germany. I'm there for 3 weeks. I see this little southwest corner of Germany where my family had 600 years of rabbis and political leaders and lawyers and everything else. I see my last name all over the place on billboards, street signs, cemeteries. And I was like, okay, well, there was a lot of us here, and there's a legacy here. And then I went to Buchenwald, and I wanted to walk around the stone quarry that my grandfather worked in while he was incarcerated there. And then I realized, to answer your question, there was a lot of people that made a lot of sacrifices for me to have the ability to do what I've done, to have the career that I've had, to have the personal life that I've had, which has been pretty soft, and to write a book like this. And so if the Holocaust was all about a bunch of people being persecuted and sent off to camps to die, I don't think that was it. I think it was for those of us that came afterwards to say, we respect that sacrifice and we respect what happened. We're not going to forget about it, but we sure as hell am not going to waste the rest of our lives on frivolous stuff. And I think it was motivating in a lot of ways to be sure that we honored that I honored that.
Well, one could argue you certainly were. You were a transplant surgeon. You were talking about that. There's nothing frivolous about that. You weren't selling pottery, right? You were saving lives.
But I think also, I think, yes, but I also think that
no
there.
Offense to the potters.
No.
You have one over here.
pottery people are people too.
Yeah.
Um,
I was grasping for it. Forgive me.
but I also think that there's something about, again, this gets back to the emotional inheritance, that epigenetic phenomenon. There's something about saying, well, yeah, okay, I've done some things in my career. That's wonderful. But what's next? What have I done lately? I'm not sure. Actually, I am sure that's not good to think that way, but kind of think that way.
Okay. All right. Last question, and then I'm going to kick it over to you folks if you want to ask some. So, I've been doing this rabbi thing for almost 30 years.
Getting the hang of it.
I say it's practicing, right? And and as a rabbi in the Reform community and religiously on the left, I've reached a place where I really understand religion as the product of humanity, searching for God as opposed to God revealing something to humanity. To me, that explains the variety of religions. We're aspiring, we're looking for God, and the different religions become their adherents' way of understanding the divine. None of them actually, we don't have to assert whether God is or isn't. All we have to do is say, look, these are all the way the religions kind of look to find God. So I'm going to ask you, you talk about believing in. What is it you believe when you use the word God?
So I didn't find my God didn't come through religion. It came in the hospital. It came from the things I saw, the things that could not have happened without some force out there. And I hope I don't offend anyone here. My belief in God is not that there's a Muslim one, a Jewish one, a Catholic one. There's a force, and it's whatever it is. But I don't think that force distinguishes between each tribe.
That wasn't my assertion.
No, I don't think it is.
Right.
But, and I write about this in the author's note because I wanted to set this up from the outset. Our tribalism is kind of killing us. And I think the more that we break down those barriers and try to look at the universality of all of it, the better off we'll be. Because when I was working in the hospital, I didn't have trouble with the notion that something was out there. I mean, being agnostic for me did not make any sense, seeing what I saw.
So, I want to make sure I understand you because I think it's an interesting point, which is that your Jewish identity is not your path to God.
No.
Your Jewish identity is your path to who you are.
Correct.
And your sense of God comes from a broader universalist experience, that there's something grander, some grand force that's kind of driving the universe.
You got it.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you. It's a great way to move to questions from the community. So if the Potter wants to take me on, please do. Both of you come here. I'm no.
Artist, but yeah.
Anybody have a...
Well, I did have,
Yeah.
First of all, thank you. And being an artist and being visual, I was really interested in this symbol.
Yeah.
Did it mean something specific to you, or was it part of the marketing?
Yeah, yes to both of those. Book covers, the publisher will present several, and it's one of those things that you're just like, no way, that one. And then this one came up, and the compass actually made a whole lot of sense to me, because at the end of the day, that's what we're looking for, right? Is we're looking for direction. Yeah, and so I liked this one a lot because of the compass. I like the colors and all that stuff and how it's laid out, but the compass really sold me on this cover. This was about the 7th one I looked at, and I kept on rejecting them. They're like, what about this one? Gosh. So.
I like the light around it as well.
Yeah, me too.
I didn't know if so this is just an arrow for the compass. I didn't know if it was something like a scepter from like Mardi Gras proof or something.
No, I don't think so. Although that's an interesting point. I don't think so. No.
Interestingly, it's not true north, right? The compass is kind of off kilter.
Yeah.
I'm in the contextual.
But it sounds like in some ways it's, what does a compass do? It pulls you on a path, but you don't necessarily, you're not going north, you're going in another direction.
No.
But it just helps you.
Whatever. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah, thank you.
You said that when you were a transplant surgeon that you could do everything right, the patients could do everything right, but that there was a third factor involved. Is that energy the third factor?
In my view.
Okay.
In my view, I mean, since there was a big team of us, we would all be watching the same thing and reach very different conclusions. Some of the doctors, nurses that I worked with, I would say, wow, and get into the mysticism of it. And they would be like, that was the medication. When they gave me the patients, there were patients that actually died that we brought back that would tell us stories about what the other side looked like. And people on the team would be like, and I would be pretty impressed by that. And people on the team would be like, that's just a medication. They saw it on TV. So they just, and I was, okay, I don't know about that. So all of it was open to interpretation, right? But to me, there was always a third thing going on that didn't have anything to do with me. It took me a while to figure that out, but eventually I did.
Both my parents were in Europe for the entirety of the war and came to the States afterwards. And what you're talking about, that energy, that third energy, gave them drive.
Yeah.
Not the fact that they were religious and they weren't Jewish. They were Presbyterian and Catholic from Holland and France. But that third energy, just a survival drive.
Yeah.
They came with nothing.
Right. And I think just to speak about Elie Wiesel, I think he talked about that in the camps, in his book Night, about the camps as well. I mean, what else did they have to hold on to, except that? So.
But it's different than religion, or at least it was for them.
I think that's right. I mean, at least that's how I look at it.
So is that our sign?
No, I have a question.
Oh.
I have two questions. One, when you were in the operating room, did you ever feel that energy when things didn't go right, when things were also maybe wasn't successful with the transplant? And my second question is, I don't know if this is in the book or not, but because your wife and your daughter, I think, are still Catholic, how do they feel about your journey and where you're at now?
Well, to take the second part first, is supportive, very supportive. My daughters are never going to have to write a book like this. When somebody asks them what religion they are, they're going to say Catholic without hesitation. And I think that's good. As a parent, you feel good about that. And I think that, like most families, they're just happy if I find what I'm looking for. Happy, right? But I think that the first part of your question about when things didn't go well in the hospital, I think there was a tendency for us to look for what we did wrong or what could have gone differently. And when things went well, we also felt like we did that. But I think that as time went on, my own thoughts about it evolved. I mean, when I first started doing this kind of work, I was 30. I'm not the same person I was, then. And so I think there's a tendency among younger physicians, I think, especially, to think the good and the bad happens directly because of them.
The irony is we think that saving the life is the outcome that should have happened. But the truth is what should have happened is the person should have died because their heart was failing.
Right.
When your heart fails, you die.
Right.
An organ. Right. So the fact that you were able to undo nature, is real. And to say that you succeeded, well, you actually reverse nature in keeping.
That's right. Alive. I mean, one of my early medical mentors in transplant, a Catholic guy, and this might be sort of doctors talking to each other, but here we are. We're all friends now, so we can do it. He said, we just get up every day and we push away the hand of Jesus.
Well, there it is.
And, to me, we said it half jokingly, but That's how he looked at it.
So and so that there is spirituality both in the
Yeah.
natural course
Yeah.
and in the subverted course.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
I think that's exactly right.
Thank you so much, David. It's fabulous to see you. So I'm interested in, as you evolve to embracing the identity of being Jewish, can you describe with words to what that felt like and how you know you got there, and what practices of Judaism do you embrace? Because those of us that are Jewish have lots of Jewish friends, and in my experience, every single Jew practices it differently.
Yeah, I've come to find that out, and it's one of the things that's very
And the other Jew
attractive.
does it wrong.
Right, right. I've also found that out. Right, I found that out. I think it's felt really good. I mean, for me, it's stubborn. I had to put all this evidence together and then reach a conclusion. I would have never just out of the blue just sort of said, here it is, and be done with it. I had to kind of do it my own way, you know. I'm early on after having reached this conclusion and figuring out what it's going to look like for me. And so I've started to ask people like Ron, and there's a couple other rabbis that I've talked to, where what, you know, I feel like I'm a medical student again. What would you do? And there was a rabbi that said something that I don't know if Ron agrees with or not, that said, Judaism is not so much about what you believe, it's about what you do. And that's really attractive to me because in my time with Catholicism, it was all about what you believed. It was all about the afterlife. It was all about the ritual, standing up, saying the Lord's Prayer, doing all of that, and asserting your belief constantly. But having a religion that is more focused on what you do, and especially the social justice component of it, is really attractive to me. But that's a long way of also saying that I asked a rabbi in New Orleans the other day that we were doing an event at the JCC there, conservative rabbi, and he said, I said, if you had to, he said, if you had to do one thing today, do Shabbat. Just start there.
Rabbis always start there.
Right. And I didn't know that.
You start with Torah, you start with Tzedakah, where do you start?
It's not my book, but
Yeah. I mean, I was kind of,
what you do.
I was kind of intrigued by that because the more I've learned about it, the more I'm like, actually, it's kind of a cool thing. I mean, I put my phone away for 24 hours. I kind of talk to the people that are around me. It's nice. So, I mean, it doesn't sound like a bad place to start, but what do you think?
Look, for me, it's so much about what you do. It's about, I would start by encountering the world as a Jew, right? So then you have to learn, you have to know, but you have to then be asking yourself, what does it mean to be a Jew in the world? How do I treat other human beings? How do I take care of the poor? How do I treat the environment? How do I embrace education, knowledge? How do I keep my mind open? So again, I'm not saying Shabbat is obviously not a part of it, but it becomes a vehicle through which you be the person you're meant to be in the world. So that's another take. There you go. One
So
more.
along the same lines, and I'm glad you asked the question. If you could go back, after going on this journey you've been on, and publishing this book, writing this book, and were able to once again enter like a non-consulting, maybe you were back in a hospital. How do you think, or do you think that your experience and maturity and journey, how would it be better for you and better for your patients? Where do you think that would show up? How would it manifest itself through everything you've learned?
It's a good question. I mean, one interesting thing in working in the hospital is how often patients evoke God when you're talking to them about transplant and about life and death, obviously. And there was a tendency, and I don't love this about the way I reacted to it, but there was a tendency when I was younger just to say, yeah, okay. And they would say, well, whatever God's will is. And I would say, well, we're going to put you on the waiting list and, you know, we're going to get an organ for you as soon as possible. And they would say, well, if that's God's will. And I used to walk out of the room and say, well, if it's my will. And I have to say that honestly, that was my opinion. And I think now that wouldn't be my opinion. That wouldn't be my attitude. Because I think they saw it correctly, at least in my view. That not everything that happened in there was because of the force of my personality.
So what I hear you saying, would you be more inclined to sort of ask for help and to provide the professionalism and the function that you're being asked to do by something other than just your own training and expertise, and more likely to seek higher energy? You know?
I think so, and I think also being able to talk to a patient on that spiritual level is not something I was great at for most of my career, and I think I might have the ability to do that now. And I think patients would appreciate that, especially it does depend on where you are in the country. I have consulting clients all over the country. And if you're in the South and you're sick, God's going to come up. And that's not as true out here. You know, I worked in the Bay Area, and there weren't a lot of our patients talking to us about God or faith, but they did bring an internet printout about transplant, and had 55 questions about what they read. That's different. There are geographic differences in the country, as everybody knows.
I think it's a good time. Even one more is always a good place to stop.
Perfect.
I want to thank you for because what this book really is the bearing of your soul and what shines through. And I like the last questions because you moved from I don't want to say smug, but maybe that's, doctor was like, look what I can do.
Smug's the kindest thing you could say.
I'll stick with smug.
Yeah.
And then you where you are now, and this is the evolution of wisdom in a human being, is you've reached a place in your final words were ones of humility. And I think if we can face the world recognizing that we don't have the answer, that we might have found one that works for us at this moment, and it could change a year from now.
Yeah.
Then I think that's an important orientation to have, and you reveal it in your book. So thank you so much for doing that.
Thank you. No, I appreciate it.
Thank you all for being here.
Appreciate it. Thank you. That was great.
Thank you both for being here. Thank you everyone for coming tonight. For even those who came a little late, glad to have you. It's super insightful, and I think we could all use a little more humility, especially with the world right now.
Yes.
But that was so interesting. I feel like we could have gone on a lot longer, but unfortunately we have a shorter amount of time. But please, if you have not bought David's book yet, we have many copies. I'm sure he's happy to sign photos with both of these lovely gentlemen. But thank you guys so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.